So I want to talk a little bit about these two books that you've just written, the Rajiv I Knew and Memoirs of a Maverick. I got soft copies of both of them and I read both of them. But you mentioned somewhere that you had started off writing one book and then they sort of became two. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
No, the book was one, and it was split
Okay.
into three because
Oh.
when I produced my manuscript,
Hmm.
which I think ran into about 1,500 double-spaced pages
Pages.
in
Wow.
a large font, Chicky of Juggernaut took one horrified look and said, I asked you to write your autobiography, and you produced a war and peace. So I said, I said, you can cut what you like, but you can't cut my life. And I told the story of my life. And it took us about 1 year of negotiation to decide what to do.
Okay.
In the meanwhile,
Okay.
she was getting it edited. And I found that the chief job of the publisher was to just ruthlessly cut off everything in order to bring it down to a size. So I said to her that I sent my sheep to you for shearing and you've slaughtered it. So then we sat, we had a discussion. We had two or three discussions. I produced Pranab Mukherjee's autobiography in 4 volumes. And I said, well, if he can do that, why can't I? And she said, have you read it? And I had to confess I couldn't read it. And then I went back to her and I said that even if he'd written only a page, it would have been unreadable because the man is not a born writer. So you can't judge the quality of a book depending on its length or lack of length. And in the meanwhile, she gave me a horrible book called Doing Epic Shit. I hated the
Oh
name
my God.
and I hated things. And I said, this is what they want. Why did they commission me to do a biography? But the compromise we found was that she said all the bits about Rajiv Gandhi are not your personal memoirs. They are your assessment of his prime ministership. So that constitutes a biography. And you can publish
Okay.
those pages separately as a companion volume. And as for your own story, we'll split it into 2 volumes of about 300 to 400 pages each. So the second
Right.
volume is currently under heavy rewriting and heavy
Okay.
editing. I don't know what its fate is going to be. I suspect that a lot of it is simply going to
Right.
be slaughtered. And the price they put, it's 800 rupees. So at the end of it, if you take my 3 volumes, you have to put out something like 2,000 rupees. And none of them is hard bound. They're all soft cover. And
Wow.
still, this is the amount of money that's required. So I'm not surprised that sales have been modest. I'm told by Juggernaut, who are very keen on enthusing their authors, that this is a bestseller. I had 5,000 copies. How can it be a bestseller? But that's approximately the sales achievement of about 9 months of my first book, and the sales achievement on about 3 months or 4 months of my second book is much more modest. It's about 3,000 copies. And
So the
I'm
second
beginning.
one is the memoir.
The second one is the companion volume on Rajiv. That's why it's
Okay.
called the Rajiv I Knew. And
Got it. Got it.
the third one is being written, and let's see
Sure.
how it fares. But I suspect that anyone who is curious about me has already read the first volume and is not going to put out another 800 rupees to read the second volume, even if he gets tricked into thinking that 799 rupees is not 800 rupees.
So I have to ask this question. Why did she give you do epic shit? I mean, that's a completely different world that book inhabits, and what you're writing is, so do you have any
There's
idea? Did she
no,
give an explanation as to
no
why? Did she
answer.
want you to read it or?
I can only answer that there's no accounting for dinner guests' tastes. So she decided that this is what I should have as a. She always gives me books when she comes home,
Right.
and she's a very close friend of my daughter's. And
Okay.
well, I'm her client, and I've explained how I resisted writing the book for more than 5 years because I
Right.
just didn't see why, having achieved nothing at all in my various careers, anyone should be interested in my life. I wasn't even interested in it myself. But anyway, now it's come out.
No, but I thought it was fascinating because especially when it's like I was telling the folks just before you joined, your whole admission process, how you were at St. Stephen's, and then you just shoot out a letter to all these 8, 10 colleges in the UK, and Cambridge writes back and says, if you get a first division, we take you. Now that's just so interesting in today's world because that's just almost unbelievable that something like this could actually happen now when everything
Well,
is so structured and formatted. Yeah.
it was a
Go ahead, please.
different world. It was a very
Yeah.
elitist world. And the fact
Right.
that I'd studied at Doon School made it almost inevitable that they would take me in. And if I might recount the story in a few words
Sure.
for our
Please.
other viewer,
Yes.
um, I was, I because I'd got a first, but a poor first in my senior Cambridge exam, which was the school leaving exam. St. Stephen's called me for an interview, but I got into an argument with my host's father. So I arrived in St. Stephen's College late. The interviews had already started. And as I was asked to sit on a bench in the corridor, and Professor Balbir Singh walked up to me and said that you've applied for a BA in political science, but we don't teach political science in this college. So I said, really? What do you teach? So he says, economics. So as a favor to Balbir, I got economics honors. Today you have to get 102% to even be considered for economics. And
Wow.
I, I spent 2 years rather fruitlessly attempting to find a girlfriend at the coffee house and so forth. It was a vainglorious venture. And then in my third year, I decided that since I didn't have any girlfriends, the only way of getting one was to go abroad. And the only way of going abroad, I found after seeing a film called The Bachelor of Hearts, it was Cambridge. So that's why I went. I went for, how should I put it, purely sexual reasons. I got down to studying for my BA, and I just totally astonished my teachers, my colleagues, by standing first in the university and almost breaking. I think for a while I kept the university record. But how
Oh,
that
wow.
happened was that you have to be driven, and for quite the wrong reasons, I was driven.
What fun. So well, you're being very modest, I must say. But I think, and this is to everybody who's here, it's a fun read. It's like stepping back, 50 years in time and just experiencing what the world out there must have been. The London, the communist the influence of communist thinking on everybody, the kind of debates that you were having. So it was just a very different and a very, very interesting world that I think you can kind of touch upon. And I found memoirs much more interesting than the Rajiv I knew because that was more political, I thought, while of course there's a lot of you in it and your decision to leave the service and all of that. But I did think that memoirs is more interesting. Talking about the writing of the book, especially for Rajiv, you repeatedly mentioned that your secretary and PA had done a lot of research for you. So, do you qualify that research? What are the sources of that research? Because a lot of the people here might be writing nonfiction or might even be writing fiction, but they will also need to understand the research aspect of things as a writer. So, if you could help us with that.
You see, I am and was even more computer illiterate. I use a laptop as a typewriter. I really don't
Sure.
understand the functions and the apps and so forth. So Vandana, who was my secretary when I started writing this book, she
Mm-hmm.
was the one who showed me how I could access papers from the past and so on and so forth. And she also pulled out some things that enabled me to do it. But when Venkat, who had been my PA from 1992 to 2009, and then
Mm-hmm.
again became my PS in 2016 and is still there, he had relentlessly maintained every single piece of paper,
Oh,
including
wow.
he shouldn't have been copying, official communities and so forth. And I didn't know that he'd done this. This was entirely done by him. And so when I started writing, he started producing these documents one after the other, one after the other. And having the documents on my side, I was left with no alternative but to use them. And when I used them, the book became longer and longer and longer. And in the meanwhile, I also contacted, the archives at St. Stephen's. I contacted the archivist at Doon School.
Yeah.
I found that the first thing I'd ever had printed, which was at the age of 9, a description of a picnic, that had been given to me as a gift in Welham School when I went there as the Founders Day chief guest. So over a period of time, there was a lot of miscellany that had been collected. And that is how they helped me. They didn't actually do any research. They knew where the papers were and they kept
Wow.
producing them. And that is how I was able to access these. And I spent at least half as much time reading not only the papers that were given to me, but also books in a rather large library that I had, which were relevant to what I was reading, and then
Okay.
writing. And while about three-quarters of the writing was actually done by me by fingers, and I cannot write a single line correctly. I have to keep correcting every single sentence. About a quarter, I succeeded in dictating to Venkat, who was very good at producing a draft that requires a lot of correction. But I find the process of correction is a process of revision. And therefore, it's
Yes.
very useful that I don't know how to type, because if I did, then I would have forgotten the mood by the time I got back to checking out whether all the commas and the full stops are in the right place. So I
Right.
think my very lack of computer ability has helped greatly in giving some kind of coherence to these volumes.
Interesting. So now I'm going to come to a slightly sensitive topic because what you've written is a memoir. So we'll focus on the memoir side of things just now. And whenever people are writing memoir, and we get this all the time, there is like, I want to write about this person, but I'm afraid they'll feel hurt. Or I want to, talk about X, Y, Z, but people will know who they are, and it's a memoir and it's nonfiction, and it might offend them. So did you have to navigate that a little bit, or was that in your mind, or did that come back to bite you after your book was out? Tell us about that.
At the age of 83, there are very few friends left alive. So that was a great help in telling the truth about them. But the book is mostly telling the truth about myself. And I have not spared myself. I have admitted to all my faults. I have underlined many of my faults. I've explained how coincidences helped in my time. I attempted, I don't know how successfully, to not boast, but make it a story, a continuous story of
Right.
successes and failures. I have concentrated perhaps more on failures than I have on successes because one really can't dwell too long on one's own achievements, but one
Sure.
can explain where one went wrong. There
Right.
are a number of nasty remarks I've made, but mostly about people who are dead. And with regard to one very close friend, I'm not going to, I hope I'm not revealing anything here. I wrote one line in a paragraph that was full of praise of him, because he's really outstanding as a colleague. It said that he forgot to actually collect from the Prime Minister's office the clearance for me to travel to Turkey. So I got a telephone call in Turkey from the ambassador's, from the minister's principal secretary, asking why I had not taken permission to travel abroad. And he got so upset by this that I have removed it from the second volume so that
Okay.
the friendship can be preserved. So one
Okay.
has to be sensitive. And
Sure.
the other thing that I decided, because once I got to Cambridge, my success on putting notches on my golden cane increased exponentially. And I thought the one thing I should not write about is women I've known. And
Right.
I thought that would hurt my wife. I thought it
Sure.
would cause an unnecessary pain to my children. And I
Right.
also didn't see why white-haired octogenarian women should be in, should have find what their indiscretions in their 20s revealed to an avid. So that part of my life I have completely blocked out. And I've
Okay.
confessed that in my introduction.
That's it's this is a gorgeous conversation. I should just tell you that. But one of the names that comes up, at various points in the memoir, especially, is Jam, who is
Mm.
better known as Swaminathan S. Ankalesarya Aiyer. And he's of course famous in his own right, and he's Swanomics is his own coined term. And so did you get him to read it? Did you get him to review it and give you feedback? Because there is a
I
little
sh-
bit of rivalry, but there is also a lot of love and affection that's very visible.
well, I showed him and I showed my sister my own memories of my mother, which is in the first chapter. My
Right.
mother, as you, since you read it,
Yes.
was orphaned at the age of 8. She had a very bad marriage for about 12 years, and then she ruled the roost as a single mother. And then, when we were getting married, to her intense disapproval, to various people from different parts of the country and different religions, she retired for the last 17 years of her life to the Shivananda ashram. So I needed to recheck facts about our childhood. And both Jam and Tara, my sister, were in some ways helpful, and in some ways they complicated my memories, because every child, I think, has its own perspective on its parents. And while there were some incidents where we agreed that this is what happened, there were others in which there were different interpretations. And my youngest brother, whom I was very, very fond of, he was not only my brother, he was also my best friend. He committed suicide at the age of 32. And my sister has a very different explanation for why he took his life than the one that I gathered. He took his life in San Diego, out in Southwest America. And I was at that time in Iraq, and my brother and sister were in India. So we really knew nothing about it. But I decided that my sister's story may or may not be true, but I'm not going to use it because I have not been able to get confirmation of it. And his wife, who married again within a few months, is still alive. And I see no reason why she should be brought into this story.
Right. Okay. Uh, Great.
I've also
Thank you so much
consulted,
again.
I've also consulted on specifics with some other more distant members of my family. And one of them,
Okay.
Karthik Pashupati, who is my cousin, uh, sent me photographs which were invaluable, and a letter
Oh,
that he had picked up, which my aunt had written to somebody about my parents' failing marriage. So I used that in the book.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate it. Folks, so if you guys have questions and you want to ask or you want to share some of your questions, uh, yes, we have the first one here already from Shraddha Biani. I'll read them out to you. You don't have to worry about uh, where did the chat go? Just give me a moment. I'll pull this up. Here we are. Yeah. So Shraddha is saying, I truly admire how you've managed to keep writing books and columns alongside an exciting political career. I'd love to know who your favorite writers and books are.
It's a very good question. I used to, as a schoolboy, and when I was in St. Stephen's, read a fair amount of fiction. But somewhere along the line, I think it was when I went to Cambridge, I found fiction very boring and therefore turned to nonfiction, particularly to history. So my tastes in literature have changed over time. As a younger man, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was very
Mhm.
deeply influenced by the Alexandria Quartet of Lawrence Durrell, and in particular, the first volume of that quartet, which is called Justine. Indeed, this I am ready to say, I think the first woman I ever fell in love with was Justine. And I was very, very intrigued by her character. But I was even more fascinated with Durrell's transcreations of the poems of C.P. Cavafy, who was a Greek poet. He was a Greek Copt. He lived in Alexandria. And there are two poems. One is called God Abandons Antony, and the other is called The City, which I think have remained my all time favorites. The City, if I might
Wow.
recite a few lines, goes,
Please do.
you tell yourself, I'll be gone to some other land, some other sea, to a city lovelier far than this could ever have been or hope to be, where every step now tightens the noose, a heart in a body buried and out of use.
Oh,
How
wow.
long must I be here confined among these dreary purlieus of the common mind? So many years have I been here, spending and squandering and nothing gained. And the poet replies to him, there's no new land, my friend, and no new sea. This city will follow you. And then he goes on to say that you've wasted your life on this one plot of ground. And so you've ruined its worth everywhere now over the whole earth. And that is a poem that is resonating with me after I read it at 18, even at the age of 80. I was also very taken
Wow.
with T.S. Eliot. And although I couldn't understand him, I still relentlessly read him. And I think his Murder in the Cathedral is perhaps the most outstanding play I have ever read. I was lucky in school that we had a very good Englishman teaching us English, and he taught us Hamlet. But the only thing I remember is his asking us, what is an untimely beer? This is because Laertes, after Hamlet is killed, says, take him to his untimely beer. And Holdsworth asked, what is an untimely beer? Is it a beer before 11 in the morning? And that's the only thing I remember of Hamlet. Then
Wow.
I
Okay.
started reading a lot of history. And I think what absolutely grabbed me was Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August, which describes the first month of the First World War. And it has taken me all these years from the time I was about 20 till literally the month of April to visit Sarajevo and see the site where Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand and sparked two world wars in succession. And I've
Wow.
been, on the basis of reading Solzhenitsyn's August 1914, I visited
Hmm.
Poland, which is where the opening bars of the Russian attempt at invading Prussia before the Germans could get back there was played out at great loss to the Russians. And
Mm.
Solzhenitsyn has alternated chapters of history with chapters of fiction. It's a most
Oh,
unusual.
wow.
So it's
Interesting.
I read quite a lot, and these are some of the books. I could go on and on, but I want to stop here. These are some of the books, some of the writers who made a major impression on me, and I think thereby contributed to my own writing. You
Sure,
didn't
sure. Thank
mention,
you.
you didn't mention my favorite book, which is called Confessions of a Secular Fundamentalist, which Penguin published in 2004. And I've just been reading Nivedita Menon's book on secularism and its misdirections. And that is resonating with me at the moment.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. The next question is from Kobe. She's saying, what has been your process when writing your books? Do you plan it out chapter wise and then add the substance, or is it more organic?
Actually, my life, once I revisit it, not normally, because normally I don't revisit it, but to write this book, I had to revisit my life. And I was really rather surprised to see how it was like looking at a film. I could see it scene by scene by scene. And I could remember almost everybody concerned. Not for the first 4 or 5 years of my life. I was 6 when partition took place. And my family had moved to Lahore. And so we are refugees from Pakistan. Perhaps the only Tamil Brahmins to be refugees from
Yeah,
Pakistan.
probably.
And my father had thought that maybe he would live on in Lahore after it became Pakistan, because he'd lived there for 20 years and his entire clientele lived in what became West Pakistan. Uh, my mother, on the other hand, was living with us in Simla. So Simla fell
Right.
in India and Lahore in
Yeah.
Pakistan. So incidents relating to partition, which I've mentioned in my book, are perhaps my earliest vivid memory. And from then onwards, the rest of my life followed in sequential scenes, as if I was watching a film. And I then decided that we'll have a chapter on the early life, which will include St. Stephen's, and then a separate chapter on Cambridge, which was the defining moment of my life, and then a chapter on my very tangled entry into the Foreign Service after having passed the exam, because I was dubbed a communist in the year that the Chinese had invaded us. And
Right.
then the other chapters of my life automatically followed. So the chapterization was a writer's device, but the story
Right.
as a whole was a film that ran in my mind with a soundtrack.
Lovely. Lovely. Well, it's great to speak with you. And I will encourage everybody here again, do check out the book if you have an opportunity. Anna Kapoor has a question. Curious if looking back at his life with this perspective, the regrets and highlights have changed from what it might have felt while living it. So, did you have different regrets when you were, say, 60 or 40 from what you have now? Do you have regrets, firstly? You don't have to have them.
Well, my life has been a roller coaster ride. I have had highs that would have been romantic, in fact, impossible. It would be a fantasy when I was at school to imagine that one day I would be a cabinet minister with 4 different portfolios. When I was in the Foreign Service, it seemed a fantasy to be able to get elected from Tamil Nadu of all places. I hardly knew any Tamil, not just once, but 3 times over. Um, it was a fantasy to get a first class in my B honors, which is what enabled me to go to Cambridge. It was my biggest desire at Cambridge or on my way to Cambridge to become the president of the union. That didn't happen because I
Didn't
lost
happen.
the election by 6 votes.
Election. Yeah.
So and then when I took the decision to seek voluntary retirement from the foreign service and go into politics, if it hadn't been for my wife who encouraged me to do it, and my brother Jam, who offered
Yeah.
to pay for my kids' college education if the
Yes.
whole experiment failed, I don't think I could have done it. But when I did it, 1990, the first year of voluntary retirement, was a very bad year. Yes, my column was doing well and I was making some money out of it, but we were living in very cramped conditions. And I didn't know when the election would come. There was no reason why the election should take place before the end of 1994. And then, boom, Mandal versus Kamandal. And I found that we were about to go into an election. But we didn't. Instead, Rajiv invited Chandrasekhar to form the government. And then that fell for various reasons, which are mentioned in the book. And I found myself as a candidate in, in the constituency of the biggest leader of the Tamil Nadu Congress, who had just not, was dead opposed to me. And I had to fight him. It was like trying to be in the Congress and fight Kharge. And yet I
Mm.
won. I won,
Wow.
opposed Jayalalitha, and I won. I had my full say on Karunanidhi, and the DMK became my major supporter. So all these could not be anticipated. And of course, my entry into Rajiv Gandhi's PMO, I've explained how I didn't know him at school or college. It was
Yes.
only when I came into the PMO that I got to know him. Now, who could have
Yeah.
foretold that there would be this very strong relationship that got established because we had a common background and he had a very strong sense of humor, which is rare in Indian politics. And
Yes.
he loved my jokes and he thought he paid me the highest compliment I've ever received that whenever he gave me a task to do, I never went back to him except to say it was done. And that's why he wanted me back in his office. So these things could not be anticipated. You took a risk and you either became an Ambani for a few days and then got completely broke, or you had 10 years of drought, or now nearly 15 years of political drought that I've suffered at the hands of the same Congress party and the same Congress leadership. Indeed, I sometimes think that the Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva of my life were Rajiv Gandhi as Brahma, the creator, Sonia as Vishnu, the preserver, and Rahul as Shiva, the destroyer. I am now nobody. I'm not even, and my party is deeply embarrassed by me. And I have no role. I've not been given a role for the last 15 years. And I'm just chugging along. My PA, Venkat, is very keen that I should join the BJP, not because he thinks I belong to the saffron crowd, but that if I came back from the BJP, then the Congress would give me an important post. Because many important posts are held by defectors from the Congress who have redefected from the BJP. But I said no.
That's a strategy.
And so I prefer ignominy and being ignored to finding devious ways of coming to attention.
Well, ignominy is a strong
It
word,
has
but
led to,
yeah,
it has
I
led
guess
to
it's
Ratna. the first of my researchers, telling, telling me at our last meeting, which was about 9 months ago, and I think will be our very last meeting, she more or less spat out at me that you're a failure.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
knew that she was telling the truth. I am a failure. And that is why I don't understand why Juggernaut wants me to write a book. What is there for me to tell? But I've told it. I've told nothing in 1,500 pages of manuscript.
So tell me, if Chiki had not been there, would you have written this book, these
No,
books?
it's
No.
only her. And I've explained it in my introduction to the first book that it was at a reception in my house at which Sonia Gandhi was present a few months before my retirement from the Rajya Sabha that Chiki just threw this suggestion at me. And I said to her, but no, what is there in my life that is worth recounting? And at that point, Sonia Gandhi said, I think you should write it. And I realized at that moment that if she thought I should write my autobiography, it meant that she had no political plans for me. And that is why I realized that with one chapter closed, I could perhaps open another chapter. But it took, as I mentioned to you earlier, 5 years of lockdown, of my own mental lockdown, followed by another, by the COVID lockdown, which really got me to start writing this book. And as I
Mm.
said, over a period of 7 or 8 months, I found myself landed with a manuscript that ran to 1,500 pages and an editor who was only pulling out not her blue pencil, but her scissors to cut as much of it as possible.
So we have three questions which are now in the group, and they are sort of related. The first is that how easy is it to write fearlessly in the current political climate? And related to that is the question: is there a seed in your mind for a book you want to write that you don't think will be received well, or you don't feel ready to write yet?
Well, the answer to the first question is that the person who asked the question has been a little too long at your Himalayan retreat and seems to have got himself cut off from what has happened on the 4th of June. Yes, the
Sure.
question he asked was very valid till the 4th of June. But now
Agreed.
I'm
Yeah.
utterly liberated. I've just written a column in which I have described what the election takeaways were. My editor has refused to publish it. So I've rewritten it as Will Modi 3-0 last? And I predicted that we'll be in the next election within the next 2 years. And therefore, I feel completely liberated. And it is in this, in fact, my editor would not allow me to call, he allowed me to call Gandhi Gandhi and Nehru Nehru and Rajiv Rajiv and Rahul Rahul, but not Modi. It had to be PM Modi. I've just written a
Wow.
column in which I have stopped PM Modi and called the man by his own name and not by all the names by which I wish to call him. That we'll have to reserve for an evening of quiet drinking. Um, but
It may
I
not be
feel
that quiet.
I think we are entering a new era. And if the man attempts to be authoritarian with the kind of 12 vote majority that he has, he'll go sooner than later. So, my
Right.
answer to your question is there was a certain element of restraint, but because my book was largely before Modi was born, and went to school, and when Modi didn't go to college but claimed he had, and didn't get a BA or an MA but claimed he had. I was quite free of the Modi syndrome for most of the
Mm.
book. But when I came the absolute present, where nothing much has happened to me except my quarrels with Modi, I have attempted to explain that I never called him a chaiwala. It was he who called himself a chaiwala. And I merely mocked it. And I never said he was niche. I said he's a niche kisam ka aadmi, which is a completely different expression. And yet,
Sure.
these two expressions have been used by whom? By the Congress party to turn against me and remove me completely from the party scene. And I
Hmm.
keep wondering to myself, why do I remain? I remain because I am a bhakt of Gandhiji and Nehru. And
Right.
I was 6 years old when Nehru became prime minister. I was 23 when he died. So the biggest influence on my thinking from the age of 6 to the age of 23, 17 years, was Jawaharlal Nehru. And I never liked the prefix Pandit. So I generally refer to him as Jawaharlal Nehru. And they were the Congress. I therefore
Yeah.
want to be there. That's why. Okay, the second question was I've forgotten. Can you
It was,
repeat it?
is there a seed in your mind for a book that you want to write that you don't think will be received well, or that you don't feel ready to write yet?
Well, I was told by Chiki, and more importantly by Nandini Mehta, who was her managing director, that my book would sell like hotcakes. I have just called Nandini after I received my royalty statement. And I said to her, but the book is sold only 4,800. She says, but that's outstanding. Outstanding to sell 4,800. She says, yes. Most of our books only go for 2,000. She said, you have to be a Chetan Bhagat, or what's the name of this epic shit fellow, to be able to
Ankur
sell
Warikoo.
copies. And Wakru, something like that.
Ankur
Uh,
Warikoo.
okay, Mariku.
Ankur,
Uh,
Ankur Warikoo. Yeah.
okay, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
enlightening me on a subject I did not wish to be enlightened on. And it's such a useless book. And
Yeah.
it talks such rubbish and in such vulgar language that I'm afraid a Victorian like me just can't take that kind of thing. I'm sure Mr.
Yeah.
Modi could lap it up. But I'm referring to the book, not to the title. This is this is because uh, the fact is that I don't think I wanted to write a book which 4,800 people would buy and 4,500 would leave on their shelves and 300 people would actually read it, including, of course, Chetan. And my second book, which I'm very proud of because it's a real work of historical research on a character who has been deeply misperceived. It was Gopal Gandhi who told me that my title was wrong. I should say why he was the most misperceived Prime Minister of India. But for me, that is a lived horror, the attacks on Rajiv Gandhi. And therefore, I was very delighted to find through my researches. And that really required very heavy reading and a lot of interaction and the use of the internet that when Veer told me, he's been my great supporter all these years. When Veer told me that this is a piece of outstanding historical research, I felt that I may be the Barbara Tuchman of the Rajiv era. So I would urge you to read the book, even though it's not immediately of interest. But I must say, at these sales figures, I am very slow in editing the second volume of my memoirs, which is called A Maverick in Politics. And I've had to put a great deal of willpower into writing a book, which I don't think will sell even 4,000 copies. And if that is called outstanding, then I'd really rather not be outstanding. But there you are.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, sir, speaking with you. Thank you so much for making the time.